Kia ora. Those not familiar with Christianity and what passes in many churches nowadays could be excused for thinking that we are fundamentally a religion of beliefs. The loudest of these being a literal belief in the power of a supernatural being, God, and the inerrancy of the Bible, closely followed by beliefs in the divinity of Jesus, his so-called virgin birth, his science-denying miracles, and his post-death resuscitation. And especially that his purpose, mission if you like, was to save people from their sins. Save usually meaning accepting this package of beliefs I've just outlined, and the wisdom of the authorities promoting the package, then renouncing your unbelief, your skepticism, and signing up. Sins meaning anything a religious leader or institution says it means, which is why sin is not only an inexact word, but a loaded and dangerous one. These literal beliefs, for many if not most of us at St. Luke's, have unravelled over time, or were never part of our believing matrix. The Christianity we adhere to at St. Luke's, while still drawing inspiration from the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, and from the life and ministry of Jesus and his followers, is markedly different. The God of our experience is not known through acts of power, but by the ways of love. Not by control and strength, but by vulnerability and weakness. The Bible, a collection of writings over centuries, full of flaws, failings, and gems, portrays spiritual, read God, experiences, which reflect human experiences. It also gives us the best collection we have of writings about Jesus, which are also full of flaws, failings, and gems. Which is not to say there aren't many different ways of being Christian or expressing your Christianity or trying to follow the way of Jesus. Continuing my backpack metaphor from last Sunday, beliefs are things we travel with in our pack. And as the journey progresses and years pass and our experience and vistas broaden, some of the beliefs in the pack will be discarded and some new ones acquired. Things we once thought were crucial to our understanding of the world might become less so. Our language for faith will probably change. Doubt will become a friend, helping us to evaluate what we're carrying. Some things we carry will help us time and time again, and some things will trip us up and prevent us from finding our true self time and time again. Sometimes it is the word God itself that trips us up. I think it was the late great spiritual poet John O'Donoghue who said that we need to be careful how we use the word God in our writing, in our poems, and in our songs. For it is such a big word, said John, that it can suck all the air out of the room. Maybe this is why the Hebraic tradition would use the tetragrammaton, YHWH. They wouldn't use it. They would not say the name of God, but they use substitutes like Lord, sovereign, Almighty, or the names of Canaanite deities like Elohim. The problem with the word God is that it's so big, so undefinable, so loaded with projections, and therefore so easily misunderstood and misused. And there is much destructive history, with people claiming they are God's chosen or claiming God is endorsing their actions, which brings so much shame and dishonor and pain to the word. So nowadays on my travels with my backpack, I try to use it less frequently, and in so doing have come to appreciate other writers and traditions who do similarly. Like the prayer in our order of service today, from the Ute, spelled U-T-E, peoples. They're an indigenous North American nation. In this prayer, rather than thinking of the earth as a deity, the prayer is inviting us to think of the earth as a source of sacred energy, and then inviting us to use our imagination to see how nature, including human nature, can teach us the values and skills necessary for a meaningful and fulfilled life. And of course, to those of us groomed by Western culture that sees the earth primarily as a utility or an asset, rather than as a friend, a mother, this prayer offers us corrective wisdom. Sacred energy is one of the frames I use to translate the word God, but is not by many means the only one. Love, especially compassionate, non-self-centered love, the unconditional, is another I frequently use. In these frames, God is a presence, personal but transpersonal, a source but not static or detached. God moves like an energy, like love, like the whisper of possibility. To return to John O'Donoghue, here's a piece of his writing where he does talk about the word God. He writes, God is the most passionate presence in the universe. There is not a stitch of utilitarianism or functionalism in God. God surges and flows and is wild. This aspect of God's vitality has been lost for so long within the tradition. Aristotle's idea of God as unmoved mover seemed to protect the transcendence of God by putting God safely beyond all change. The danger of such a concept is that it deadens the deity. God is not a dead answer. God is the greatest question in the universe, a question that has kept itself free of banal answers. This is where all fundamentalists and sects get lost. They convert the passion, wildness, and danger of God as a question into a cliched answer. The reason I began this reflection with thoughts about the word God was in order to invite you to think about the great commandment of both the Judaic and Christian traditions about loving God. What does that mean? For it's not like loving your partner, wife, husband, children, or close friends. Why use the word love at all? In Deuteronomy 6 verse 5, where the loving God injunction first appears, it's followed by a whole set of rules about how to live and think. It's as if love is obedience to wishes of the religious authorities. This hierarchical way of linking obedience and love has been normative in times past. If you love me, says the patriarch, obey me. Yet when Jesus uses the quote, he attaches to it a phrase from Leviticus 19:18 about loving your neighbor as yourself. In a less than subtle way, Jesus is deconstructing that hierarchical understanding, that hierarchical linking of love and obedience. but he's also giving substance to what loving God might mean. And when put alongside the question from Luke 10, who is my neighbour, which segues into the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus' understanding of loving God becomes politically pointed and deeply unsettling. For in the parable, the neighbour is the Samaritan. It's the heretic, the racially other, the enemy. And so to love God, one must love heretics, people of other races, and enemies. All we can think of loving God, like I said in my thoughts on vision a couple of weeks ago, as seeing as God sees. This means being immersed in God, in sacred energy and compassion, love, noticing and listening, in order that we take on God's values and perspectives and become God's hands and legs, eyes and ears and heart. The second reading in our liturgy today follows on from last week's theme about true greatness and the request of Jesus for power by James and John. Imagining that Jesus was going to Jerusalem in order to be acclaimed as a national liberator and then ruling over the whole land of Israel. They, and by the response of the other disciples, they too wanted seats of power on his left hand and right hand, which were occupied, as we know, by two thieves, two losers in the Roman Empire. Then Jesus uses this request of James and John to talk about leadership, saying, "Whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all." Which has led ever after to Christian leaders dressing up power in the language of servanthood, and their followers projecting unrealistic expectations upon the leaders. The problem is that a leader will always have power. That's what leadership is. At its best, a wise use of power for the benefit of others. Whereas a slave or servant in the first century, and probably any century, despite cinematic notions to the contrary, doesn't have that power. Servant leader is therefore an oxymoron. And Jesus is using the oxymoron to challenge leaders and any who aspire to leadership, any who aspire to greatness, to put first those who are at the bottom of the power hierarchy, like servants and slaves. In other words, Jesus is saying, use your power, your authority, whether you have a little or a lot of it, to prioritize not the welfare of all, which can quickly become the welfare of the most influential, but prioritize the welfare of the most vulnerable. Like, as in the Good Samaritan, those your society deems to be heretics, foreigners, or enemies. And this is how God sees. This is God's vision. I read the reviews, as you might have done last week, of the movie The Apprentice, a commentary on part of Donald Trump's early life, his dysfunctional family of origin, and his rise to power under the tutelage of the unscrupulous lawyer Roy Cohn. Cohn's advice is that in life there are only two types of people, winners and losers. And Cohn's three rules for being a winner were firstly, attack, attack, attack. Secondly, admit nothing, deny everything. And thirdly, no matter what happens, always claim victory. apart from hearing the resonance with Trump's current day behaviour, I was struck by how contrary such advice was to the teachings of Jesus, like in our text for this Sunday. And contrary no matter what part of the Christian spectrum you come from or identify with. For Jesus was someone who, while knowing his society's boundaries of division between winners and losers, refused to adhere to them, deliberately flouting them, until he too was deemed a loser and killed as one. Jesus' advice to a follower might have been something like this. Firstly, listen. Then listen again. And when you think you know, listen again. Secondly, tell the truth as you see it, or tell a story that embeds your truth. And when they get angry at you, remember the truth of who you are. And thirdly, winning doesn't matter. For the powerful will always find ways to win. What matters is standing alongside the so-called losers, the vulnerable, the dispossessed, and the stigmatized, and being a loser with them. Solidarity and the community it gives rise to is more important than victory as defined by the powerful.